Lecture 26, Mythic Heroes, Mwindo.
In our last lecture, we took a closer look at the monomyth of the hero according to two of its theorists, Otto Rank and Joseph Campbell. This time we'd like to consider the African epic of Mwindo in terms of both of those paradigms that we looked at last time. In the process, we hope to learn more about heroic myths themselves and about the value of the concept of the monomyth, at least as an analytical tool, the way we've been using it. This epic comes from Central Africa in eastern Zaire. The Mwindo story has been passed down orally for many generations, so it's still a living myth for them. In the 1950s, an anthropologist, Daniel Biebuik, made a written copy of a performance. He recorded it while he was listening to it, and he published that version in 1969. In 1977, he published 3 other versions of the same myth performed by different singers in different places. And the difference among the 4 versions are instructive. All 4 have the same basic narrative, but there are some significant differences as well. And what those differences remind us is that when a myth is still alive, it has no definitive shape or structure. We've noticed this earlier, and we said that a printed copy of a myth makes a kind of fossil out of a living thing. And we can see that here too in the differences among the 4 versions, even though for us, ironically, we see the differences in 4 printed versions. About half of the text is footnotes. Some of them are explanatory, helping us understand the social conventions of the people whose myth this is, but others are designed to help us recreate in our minds as we read the circumstances of a performance of this epic. We're told, for example, whenever the bard needs a break or when he asks for additional payment. Still others give responses of the audience sitting at his feet and reacting in ways that remind us that this is how myths have functioned through most of history. It also explains that at some points the singer rose up to dance or to act out a part or to sing songs, usually accompanied by 4 percussionists who sat along with him while he was reciting this. What all those footnotes do is they allow us to get as close as possible to what it would be like to be sitting in an audience listening to a bard perform this poem. We'll be using the 1969 version, but I encourage you to hunt up and read the other 3, from which we can learn a lot about how living myths actually work. The story takes place in a village called Tobando in the state of Ahimbi. The action takes us to remote places, but as Campbell's monomyth suggests, it will always return to where it began, back to this village. The action here, in fact, will take us to all 4 spheres of the Nyanga universe, the sky, the atmosphere, the earth, and the underworld, but it always returns back to this specific village. The action begins when Mwindo, who's the chief of the village, takes 7 wives. At a council, he decrees that they must bear only daughters. Any son born to any of them will be immediately put to death. Critics have rationalized this a little bit, since among the Nyanga, the groom has to pay a large bride price to the parents of the woman he marries. It may be that Mwindo is protecting his cash flow. He has lots of daughters, he's going to have lots of money coming in and none going out to pay a bride price for his son. But if we remember Otto Rank's monomyth of the family, based on the family romance, the paradigm of that monomyth suggests that Mwindo doesn't want any sons to challenge his authority. Daughters are always much safer for a chief than sons are. His first 6 wives produce daughters on cue, but the 7th one has a pregnancy that lasts way beyond term. As week after week goes by and she still hasn't delivered this child, she gets more and more worried about what's going on. And then strange things start to happen. Firewood and water and vegetables start showing up just outside her door every morning. And when we're asked, who's doing this? Who's providing her with all of this? We're told that the infant in her womb is already doing this work for her. So he's already announced himself as a fairly extraordinary infant. In her womb, in his mother's womb, he also meditates on how he wants to be born. He settles finally on emerging from his mother's middle finger. When it happens, the midwives are understandably stunned. The midwives, also recognizing that this is an extraordinary child, refuse to divulge the gender of the child to the chief because they're afraid that the chief will have it put to death. But the chief finds out anyway, and as soon as he finds out, Mwindo attempts to do what he promised to do. He tries to kill the child by hurling spears at him. But the spears keep being deflected by the baby so that the spears simply keep hitting the center pole of his mother's house. Then Mwindo, having failed to kill him this way, makes his counselors bury the infant alive, which they do. But from the grave, a brilliant light shines, and the next day the infant is back in his mother's hut. The midwives have named this baby Mwindo, and which we're told means a boy following a series of girls. He was born being able to speak and laugh, and he brought with him from his birth several really supernatural possessions. One is a conga scepter, which is a kind of, looks like a fly swatter. It's made of a buffalo tail, which is used in a lot of Nyanga ceremonies. But in the poem, that conga scepter is going to represent always the hero's force. He also has with him an adze and a bag containing a miraculous rope. Mwindo has tried twice now to kill this son and failed to do so. So he has his counselors make a huge drum and enclose the baby in it, then seal up the drum and throw it in the river. As soon as the drum is thrown in the river, it rains for 7 days and 7 nights and causes a famine in the village. Presumably, this is a sign which is being sent that you shouldn't mess with this baby, but Mwindo doesn't get it. The maidens going down to draw water one day hear the baby singing from inside the drum, and they go running back to the village to report what they've heard. Everybody comes back to hear the baby singing this song, and he repeats it for their benefit. What he's singing is that he is going to go hunt out his paternal aunt, who's married to a water serpent who lives in a nearby village. And after he repeats the song, and then his drum begins to move. Meanwhile, there's an interlude in this poem in which we are told about a water serpent named Mukiti who marries Iyangura, who's the sister of Chief Mwindo. The account is full of details of a Nyanga courtship and marriage contracts and payment of bride price, the ceremonies that make up the marriage, and it also stresses the Nyanga values of generosity and hospitality and courtesy. It's an interesting little interlude in its own right, but it establishes 3 points that will be important for the narrative. First, it explains why Iyangura, who will function in the poem as a substitute mother for Mwindo, is absent. She lives in another village. Had she been at home, she might have actually prevented some of these abuses from happening in the first place. Secondly, Iyangura becomes Mukiti's ritual wife, and that gives her special status and a freedom to act equal almost to that of the chief himself. She'll need this freedom in the story ahead. Finally, it's customary for the ritual wife to live apart from her husband, giving her again a freedom of decision and action that his other wives wouldn't have, and she'll need this as well. Meanwhile, we left Mwindo imprisoned in the drum floating in the river, but now he uses the drum to travel towards his aunt. We are told in a footnote that among the Nyanga, a child has a very special relationship with his father's sister, who in many ways serves as a mother to him. As noted, had she lived in the village, she probably would have already stepped in between Mwindo and Mwindo immediately. But since she's married and has moved away, Mwindo has to go to her. Traveling in his drum, Mwindo uses his magic to get past the fish and the crabs that the water serpent Mukiti depends on to guard his realm. Eventually, Mwindo runs into the younger sister of Mukiti, who is herself a snake divinity. She's not sure what to do, so she asks her brother for advice. But by the time she gets to the brother and asks for advice, it doesn't matter because Mwindo has already gotten past her by traveling in his drum in the sands underneath the water. The maidens at the river's edge find out about Mwindo, and they run to tell Iyangura. She comes to see for herself, and then when he says that he's her nephew in this drum, she asks him a lot of questions to make sure that he's really who he says he is, and then she slashes the drum open and frees the infant. As we've noted, Iyangura is the ritual wife, so she lives apart from her husband. Because she lives apart from her husband, she's guarded by a village official who decides that this extraordinary infant needs some close monitoring. So he sets a series of traps for Mwindo. A hedgehog, however, warns Mwindo about the traps, and then the hedgehog digs a tunnel for him straight to his aunt's house. And so with the help of his conga scepter and Spider, who spins webs over all the traps, Mwindo avoids them all, and he even manages in the process, just to get even a little bit, to set that official who set all these traps for him, to set the official's hair on fire. The aunt says, look, he was just doing his duty. He's just doing what he's supposed to do. So she asks Mwindo if he will please save him. So he puts the fire out and saves the official. And the official then gives in and says, this is an extraordinary infant. He praises the infant, and he's been won over to Mwindo's side. Mwindo then explains to his aunt what's going on at home, and his aunt said she'll go back to the village with him, see what can be done about his father. On the way to the village, they stop at what's called a village of bats. These are uncles of Mwindo, but they're also some kind of blacksmiths, and what they do is they forge some kind of mail for him to protect his body. They come along too, so that by the time Mwindo arrives back at his home village, he has quite an entourage. On the night before they arrive, there are torrential rains, and simply by force of will, Mwindo creates houses for all of these people to stay in to keep them out of the rain. And then he summons food and cooking utensils from the village itself, which come flying through the air into the houses he has just built. It's an interesting passage, again, giving us a lot of details about how the Nyanga live, what they eat, how they cook their food. If we remember back in Lecture 7, we had a Mayan creation story in which the wooden people, a failed creation, were destroyed not just by a flood, but by their own furniture and utensils attacking them. And that gave us a really good, clear picture of what their material culture was like when we had strainers and pestles and tortilla pans flying through the air. The same thing happens here as we get a good sense of how these people live. The next day, Mwindo sends his uncles into the village to attack it, but they're all killed by Shemwindo's warriors. So Mwindo enters the village alone. He sings a song as he walks into the village, asking Lightning, who is his special protector, he asks Lightning to attack the village. Lightning does, and the whole village is destroyed, including all of its inhabitants. But Shemwindo, the chief, escapes via a fern route that leads straight down into the underworld. Mwindo restores the village, brings his uncles back to life, establishes them in the village, and then he goes after his father. The underworld to which he travels is the realm of Mwisa, the lord of the underworld, and in the underworld also live an aardvark named Natumba and Shubarungu, who's the god of fire. Mwindo, when he goes down into the underworld, leaves one end of his magical rope with his aunt, and he keeps the other one with him so that they can communicate with each other. Just outside the village of the dead, Mwindo encounters Kahindo, who is Mwisa's daughter. She's covered with yaws, which is a terrible skin disease. And she helps him by giving him a series of formulae that he can use to outsmart her father, who will no doubt try to play tricks on him and to hold him in the land of the dead. In exchange for the formulae, Mwindo cures her yaws. And everything goes as Kahindo predicted. There are a series of traps that are set for Mwindo, but thanks to the fact that the daughter has helped him, he escapes them all. But the Mwisa says, if you want your father back, I'll turn your father over to you, but you're going to have to do a bunch of jobs for me first. And he gives him a series of really, really daunting tasks to perform. The very first one is that he's supposed to clear a forest, plant banana trees, cultivate them, and harvest the bananas all in a single day. With the help of his magic amulets, he manages, but he's just about finished doing this first job when Mwisa sends his belt to subdue Mwindo. His belt is for him the kind of equivalent of Mwindo's conga scepter. It's his sort of magic sign of his power. That belt nearly kills Mwindo, but he is saved by his own conga scepter. And then when he's saved, he sends his conga scepter to attack Mwisa. And it is so successful at that attack that he seems to have actually killed him. When Mwindo arrives later on that day with the bananas, Kahindo, Mwisa's daughter, talks Mwindo into reviving her father, and once again he capitulates. He brings him back to life. Then the next day he set another impossible task, gathering honey under impossible conditions. And again he succeeds, but again the deceitful Mwisa sends his belt which ties him to a tree until he's nearly dead. This time his ally, Lightning, cracks open the tree and saves him. Then for the second time he sends his Conga scepter after Mwisa with the same result. He seems to have killed the Lord of the Underworld. By this time, Mwindos' father, who's been from a distance observing all this, is worried that his son will actually succeed in reclaiming him. And so he runs away to the cave of the aardvark Netumba. Hawk tells Mwindo where his father has run to, and so he chases after him. When he gets there, he asks Lightning to destroy Netumba's cave, which it does, shattering the aardvark's cave. But by this time, his father has already taken off again, this time to the home of Shubarungu, the god of fire. Mwindo curses the aardvark, and then he sets off for a third time. Outside this village, he encounters a group of starving children, and then using his rope, he has his aunt sent down food for them and saves them, gives them something to eat. Shubarungu challenges Mwindo to a game of Wiki, which is a gambling game played with seeds. Mwindo loses and loses and loses and loses until he's lost everything, including his aunt, whom he stakes at the very end. He loses his aunt, but when he stakes his Conga scepter, he starts winning everything back. And finally, he has won everything of his own back, and then he wins all of Shubarungu's possessions as well. Again, Mwindo, watching this, knows that he's about to be captured, so he's taken off yet one more time. This time, Mwindo catches him, and this time he takes his father with him, and he retraces his steps through the underworld on his way back home. He stops to restore to Shubarungu all that he had won from him, and Shubarungu blesses him. He tells his life story to the aardvark, and he takes the curse off the aardvark and helps him restore his cave. And at Kahindo's request, he revives Mwisa one more time, and Mwisa then offers him Kahindo's hand in marriage. Mwindo politely refuses, but all three of these former enemies now bless him, and then it's time to go back home. Back home, he brings to life all the people who were killed in the village by lightning. There's a really charming little detail that happens in here. All of them wake up doing exactly what they were doing when they were killed, as though no time had passed at all. As we're told, the poet makes very clear, the ones who were defecating continue to defecate. Those who are copulating continue to copulate. Those who are working in the fields continue to work in the fields. And those who are quarreling with each other pick up the quarrel at the exact spot where they had left it off, as though no time had passed at all. Then there's a huge village council in which Mwindo accuses his father, and his aunt seconds all of the accusation. Mwindo acknowledges his errors, and he offers to abdicate to his son. Mwindo says, no, instead of abdicating, why don't we just split the kingdom in half? You rule one half and I'll rule the other half. Mwindo is then enthroned as ruler of one half the kingdom, and Mwindo moves away to the mountains. Iangura blesses her nephew, and then her job done, she returns back home. The poem at this point seems to have reached closure, and it could stop here, but there's one more adventure coming up for Mwindo. Now that he's a chief, he has to send out hunting expeditions, and we're told that the Nyanga for years have used pygmies as their hunters. There's a rule that says the chief cannot hunt for himself, and the pygmies have always been the great hunters of the Nyanga. So here, Mwindo sends out 4 pygmies to go hunting. 3 of them get devoured by a huge dragon in the middle of the forest. The next day, Mwindo goes out himself into the forest, and he kills the dragon with a song and with his Conga scepter. And then he brings the dragon back home and cuts it open. And out from the dragon come thousands of human captives, including the 3 pygmies who had been eaten the day before. Then he cuts the dragon up into pieces, and the entire village has a huge and magnificent feast. But Lightning, who has long been Mwindo's ally, smells the roasting dragon flesh from the great feast. Unbeknownst to Mwindo, he has a blood pact with the dragon, and now he comes to take his revenge. He carries Mwindo up into the heavens, which turn out to be places of severe heat and cold. He's forced to stay there for 1 year. He begins full of confidence. He's always been full of confidence. But the end of the year, he's been reduced to being a passive sufferer. He's been exposed to attacks of icy winds and terrific heat and thirst and rain and hail. During the year, he travels to the realms of lightning, of rain, of hail, of moon, of sun and star. And after a year's suffering up there, he's enjoined by all of these heavenly beings never to kill another animal and to accept lightning as his lifelong guardian. Then he returns home. He tells his story to his people. He announces a new era of prosperity. He gives new commandments for an ordered and civilized life, which is full of mutual respect. And then the poem really ends. If we lay Otto Ronk's and Joseph Campbell's templates on this myth, what do we find? Well, we can start out with the miraculous nature of Mwindo's birth, which announces him as a special person. He's born from his mother's middle finger, as Buddha was born from his mother's side, as Athena was born from the head of Zeus, as that Native American boy was born from a clot of blood that was kicked by a rabbit. Mwindo confirms his special nature with the name that he takes for himself. He calls himself the little one just born, he walked. He's also born under a curse or a ban, as we saw were Heracles, Moses, King Arthur, even Jesus in the interdiction of Herod. In Ronk's monomyth, this is, of course, a requirement for heroism. And Ronk lists 20 stories from all over the world in which these conditions apply. When he embarks on his adventure, he enlists the help of his aunt, Iangura. Her husband is an underwater serpent, master of the unfathomable realm of the unconscious. Both Ronk and Campbell, I think, would say. Literally, he is set free from his drum by his aunt, who is the benevolent mother figure, one of these helper figures who always comes in early in the myth. But we're really more or less back in Ronk's family romance, where an infantile crisis pits a child against his monstrous father who tries to kill him, while he tries to return to union with a loving mother. And that's exactly what happens here. Mwindo sends Mwindo into exile in an effort to kill him, and his aunt, a surrogate mother, rescues him. Having returned home and defeated his father, Mwindo then sets out on a father quest to confront him, to defeat him, and to lay claim to his kingdom. This is another reminder of that Oedipal pattern that underlies so much of Ronk's monomyth. For both Ronk and Campbell, the search for the father is the most dangerous part of the adventure. And as Campbell's In the Belly of the Whale segment suggests, Mwindo has to descend into the underworld and in some sense to die. As Campbell reminds us, the point of all of this adventure is to be reborn into the world of spirit. Mwindo is clearly a representative of the material culture, the everyday world. His motivations are avarice and the drive for power. These are the very things that the hero needs to separate himself from when he passes into the other world. Mwindo makes this passage in his river journey. The aunt serves as a kind of midwife, pulling him out into a new world. Campbell would say that he is now being pulled into the world of the unconscious, which is illustrated by the fact that Iangura's husband is a guardian of deep water, which is almost always a symbol of the unconscious in mythology. In the underworld, in his search for his father, he has, as Campbell would again note, he has a protector figure, his aunt on the other end of that rope. He has a bag full of magic amulets, all of which help him in his adventures in the unconscious. The aids, as well as the ease with which he overcomes all these dangers, show, Campbell would say, that he was ready for this adventure. And the ease with which he overcomes these obstacles happens over and over. When his aunt's guardian tries to use lightning against him, Mwindo simply reminds lightning of who he is and turns the threat aside. He tells the aardvark that a terrible fate awaits him if he tries to harm Mwindo. For Campbell, as we saw in the last lecture, a hero's readiness is symbolized by that kind of imperviousness in the world of his adventure. He cannot be harmed by these dangers. Still, having said that about Campbell, the first 2/3 of the epic seem more illuminated by Rank than by Campbell. As Mwindo searches for his father in the underworld, we remember, as Rank said, that we are born into the knowledge of our mothers, but we have to grow into that of our fathers. For the infant in the crib, the father is always a mysterious figure, an ogre approaching on the infant's primary relationship with his mother. The father can also see in the infant his own demise, threats to his own power, and these tensions create myths of a vengeful father and of a son who grows up to dethrone him to take his place. Over time, the cradle crisis changes into the hero's search for himself. He may simply become his father, or if he can draw on resources his father didn't have, he can find a different way. For a long while in this poem, Mwindo seems very ruthless, suggesting that he'll just turn out to be his father when he gets a chance. But his aunt and Kahindo recall him to humanity, asking him to show compassion for those he's vanquished. He revives those he has killed, he forgives them, and they all wind up giving him their blessings. And then when Mwindo brings his father back to the village, we might expect some kind of revenge, because that's usual in such father-son stories. In both mythical and psychological world, that's probably the path of least resistance. Mwindo surprises us here by choosing the more difficult path, turning in his warrior persona for that of a just ruler. He's learned a lot already from his journey, that journey into the other realm. But the parts of the poem, I think, that are most strikingly illuminated by Campbell's theory are the last part. The call to his adventure comes when he kills the dragon, which has eaten 3 of his pygmy hunters. It happens because he's already stepped outside the normal limits by hunting himself, which a chief is forbidden to do. Once he's beyond the safe boundaries of that conscious and communal world in which he lives, he encounters all kinds of threshold guardians. Interestingly, in this poem, he doesn't fight with any of them. Lightning, rain, hail, moon, sun, and star simply have many things to teach him. But in confronting them, he does what Campbell says is the real point of this adventure. He leaves his ego behind. He opens himself to possibilities that lie hidden from the ego and consciousness. He's repeatedly told up there in the heavens that his toughness, his pride, his ego have no place here. In the process, in a way that Campbell's paradigm would understand, up in the sky, Mwindo dies as a secular warrior and is then reborn as a sacred warrior and a world redeemer. His return, therefore, is a very peaceful one. Having been taught important things, the sky beings then allow him to return from where he started, and he says this to his people about what happened up there. He says, "I, Mwindo, the little one just born he walked, performer of many wonderful things, I tell you the news from the place from which I have come in the sky. When I arrived in the sky, I met with rain and moon and sun and Kubi star and lightning. These 5 personages forbade me to kill the animals of the forest and of the village and all the little animals of the forest, of the rivers, and of the village, saying that the day I would dare to touch such a thing in order to kill it, that day the fire would be extinguished. Then Nakuba, lightning, would come to take me without my saying farewell to my people." So he tells them about his voyage out, tells him how extraordinary it was, tells his people what happened. But what's even more important here, it's not just that he has changed. He has come back now, as he says, he has been forbidden to kill animals, and on the day that he dares to do such a thing, his return will be taken away from him, and he will be taken away without even being able to say goodbye to his people. But he also tells them that he has learned things out there. He has brought back commandments. He has brought back a new kind of order which is going to prevail in the village. And here are some of the things he tells them when he comes back that he has learned up there in the sky. He says, "May you grow many foods and many crops. May you live in good houses. May you, moreover, live in a beautiful village. Don't quarrel with one another. Don't pursue another's spouse. Don't mock the invalid passing in the village. And he who seduces another's wife will be killed. Accept the chief, fear him. May he also fear you. May you agree with one another altogether, no enmity in the land, nor too much hate. May you bring forth tall and short children. In doing so, you will bring them forth for the chief." So in a way, this is a great set of commandments for a new era in the village. So in a way, this is a poem about a young hero who grows up to be a good ruler. In this way, this makes this like the myth of Gilgamesh or the myth of King Arthur. We're told in a footnote that when the story were told to Nyanga, they were initially uncomfortable with Mwindo's boasting and his arrogance, and they put up with it only because he had been so badly mistreated by his father. By the end, we are told they liked him better, acknowledging that he had become a good ruler, both embodying and promoting values that their culture believes in. Clyde Ford, in The Hero with an African Face, says that in some ways, Mwindo returning from his year in the sky is like Moses returning from his 40 days and nights on the mountaintop with God, bringing back with him a new set of commandments which will carry his people into the promised land. And we can't expect much more than that from a hero. Next time, we will try to address somewhat the gender bias that's built into both myths and theories about them by asking about female heroes. What would they be like? In what ways would they be similar to or different from male heroes? We'll look specifically at one female hero from Greece, Demeter, and one from America, a surprise visitor, Hester Prynne. That's next time.